Making Globalization Work by Joseph Stiglitz examines the failure of globalized system of world trade and proposes a number of reforms that could bring greater fairness and equity to the poorest nations. In this session, my colleagues and I will be covering 10 chapters in the book. 1. Another world is possible. 2. The promise of development. 3. Making trade fair. 4. Patents, profits, and people. 5. Lifting the recourse curse. 6. Saving the planet. 7. The multinational corporation. 8. The burden of debt. 9. Reforming the global reserve system. 10. Democratizing globalization. In the first chapter of this book, Another World is Possible, it is exposed that globalization, specifically economic globalization, has failed its promise to improve the lives of millions around the world. Economic globalization is the closer economic integration of the world's countries through the increased movement of goods, services, capital, and labor. Stiglitz explains in the book that globalization has the potential to benefit millions, but it has failed to deliver due to the way it has been managed. The richest countries have shaped the globalization process to suit their interests. The rules of world trade do not benefit the poorest. The rules are not fair. There are 5 general criticisms of globalization. 1. The rules of globalization benefits rich countries. 2. Globalization advances material values above all other values such as the environment or happiness. 3. Globalization robs poorer countries of their ability to rule themselves. 4. Globalization does not make everybody richer and makes many people poorer. And 5. Globalization is imposed on poorer countries whether they want it or not. Economic globalization has outpaced political globalization, and the nations of the world lack the authority to respond to a global issue in a global manner. Stronger institutions are needed to control the chaos and form suitable responses to issues such as global warming. The Promise of Development chapter mostly explains 2 economic schools of thoughts in globalization. First is free market capitalism, and the second one is the greater government intervention. First, the Washington Consensus, a school of thought that advocates for free market capitalism, calls for reduced government regulation, more privatization, and liberalization of markets. The alternative is the second one, greater government regulation of markets to protect the poor and promote economic development. This theory typically places more of an emphasis on non-economic values such as social justice, the environment, and happiness. This chapter compares the applications of those schools of thoughts in different countries and regions, such as East Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Russia. Stiglitz exposes the success of South Asian and East Asian countries and contrasts them with the failures in Latin America, Africa, and Russia. Many of those failures depended on free market economy. In the 1980s, East Asia's success in maximizing the access to markets and improvements to technology led to increased productivity during globalization. The governments carefully but pervasively intervening in the economies. Considered investments in education, infrastructure, and technology went beyond the recommendations of free market economists. These countries understood that markets had to be created and governed, and that sometimes private firms might not do what needs to be done. During the same period, in contrast with the success of East Asia countries, Latin American countries which embraced the Washington Consensus, defaulting on debts that had been built slowly over the 20th century while they built their economies in a regulated manner. Introduction of free, rapid market economies in Russia and Africa now is also regarded as a mistake. Individuals made fast fortunes in a short space of time, while the majority of the population was plunged into poverty. South Asian countries like India introduced Western economic ideas in a controlled, measured manner. This steady introduction resulted in growth. The advent of the internet allowed India to fully capitalize on globalization. India's success mirrored those in China. The greatest success around the world are shared by those who rejected the Washington Consensus. Growth and progress cannot be measured in economic terms alone. Sustainable growth needs to account for stability, employment, equality, happiness, and standards of living. Markets are essential tools in this respect, but only if they are well managed. The economy should be considered as a whole, and policy should adapt to the citizens' needs. The importance of community should also be emphasized, and efforts should be made to make societies more equal.
Hello, I am Daeun Kim, a student at IPMI Business School. Following Rizki, I will summarize Chapter 3 and 4 of Making Globalization Work, focusing on simple and efficient parts. First of all, Chapter 3 deals with making the trade fair. Adam Smith, one of the world's most famous economists, said, "Free trade allows countries to take advantage of their competitive advantage, with all nations benefits as each one specializes in the areas in which it excels." As Adam Smith says, will free trade benefit all countries? Free trade advocates highlight that it allows developing countries to use lower labor costs to replace products produced in developed countries at a lower price, while developed countries can focus on goods and services that require higher technology to increase efficiency. The book author Joseph Stiglitz refutes this claim. In the process, unemployment will increase, and an increase in unemployment will increase poverty, not growth. Also, lowering or eliminate the tariff to promote free trade will reduce taxes for developing countries, which in turn will reduce spending on infrastructure and social safety net. This in turn weakens the competitiveness of developing countries. The Uruguay trade agreement laid a foothold to promote free trade worldwide, but the side effects were severe. The trade deal created a serious disparity, making the poorest countries actually more impoverished, and 70% of revenue went to the developed world, making the uneven playing field more worse. Therefore, the author argued that the free trade system should be improved to focus more on poor countries in order to alleviate the inequity of the current system. The next chapter 4 is titled Patent, Profit, and People. As you can guess from the title, this chapter is mainly talking about the intellectual property right. In January 2004, protesters organized by the ACT-UP, an age writer activity group, occupied the street in Morocco. A key issue was that the US government wanted to delay the introduction of generic drugs to reflect the interest of its own company, which made it more difficult for Morocco to obtain the cheap drugs. Intellectual property rights grant exclusive license to the rights holder, resulting in a monopoly. So the general consensus is that this incentive can encourage new development and guarantee return to those who invest time and money. However, the author raised an objection here. Because patents impede the dissemination and use knowledge, subsequent R&D or innovation is inevitably delayed. Also, due to the patent system, each company spends a lot of money to strengthen its monopoly power or evade the patent rights of the others, which leads to decrease in productive innovation. The author proposed a solution to this, focusing on undeveloped countries. First, he argued that the intellectual property rights system should be divided into the least developed country, middle-income country, and advanced country respectively. Second, developing countries should be given more opportunity to help create new industry. Finally, in relation to this trade negotiation, it should be left to the World Intellectual Property Organization, not a specific interest group, and it should be considered at a higher level such as environment and health values, not just profit and interest. From next interesting part, Rini will guide you guys. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rini from Group D. I would like to give a summary about chapter 5 and 6 of the book, which are lifting the resource curse and saving the planet. So here are some key takeaways that I got after reading chapter 6. The first one is the richness of natural resources in a country must be carefully managed. So somehow many developing countries, they perform badly in an economic sense and suffer from what we call a natural resource curse. So there are many reasons why developing countries suffer from this phenomenon. And the first one is many developing countries, they are economically dependent on natural resources. Second reasons why many developing countries suffer from what we call natural resources curse is they tend to be wealthy countries with poor people. So the political dynamics of resources-rich countries often lead to high levels of inequality. And secondly, the key takeaways from chapter 5 is limited and lucrative resources are typically exploited by the most powerful figures in a country. These figures are unlikely to want to share their profits, which they spend on political power or weapons to consolidate their position. Next, instability, corruption, and the rise of dictators often result from these chaotic conflicts over natural resources. Moreover, countries with natural resources face the challenges of ensuring the public receive as much of the value of the resources as possible. Lastly, companies can pay for smaller bribes and lobbying fees in the developing countries. That's all for chapter 5, and moving to chapter 6 about saving the planet. So in this chapter, we highlighted some key points as follows. The first is climate change is entangled in the issue of globalization. So Joseph Stiglitz believes that the issue affects developed and developing countries alike and has been caused in part by globalization. The second is global warming is the most global of issues and one that threatens everyone on the planet. Even minor change in temperature and sea level have the power to radically reshape the world and cause utter devastation to many of the world's poorest countries. And the next is developing countries also accuse developed countries of having contributed to the majority of global warming. The fourth is the US government under George W. Bush refused to adhere to the international agreements to combat global warming. And lastly, there are 3 ways to confront global warming. First, the United States and developing countries must be brought into international agreements in a fair and balanced manner. The second is there must be a way to enforce the targets that are set by such agreements. And lastly, the cost of reducing emission must be lowered. So that's all the highlighted key points of chapter 5 and 6. Summary of the next chapter will be explained by my colleague Tasya.
In this part, we will talk about chapter 7, the multinational corporations. For many people, multinational corporations have come to symbolize what is wrong with globalization. Many would say they are a primary cause of problems. This company reaches the most country in the developing world. In 2004, the revenue of US car company General Motors was $189 billion, greater than the GDP of more than 148 countries. In its fiscal year ending 2005, US retailer Walmart's revenue were $285 billion, larger than the combined GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. These corporations are not only rich, but politically powerful. If a government decides to tax or regulate them in a way they don't like, they threaten to move elsewhere. There is always another country that will welcome their tax revenue, job, and foreign investment. Joseph Stiglitz notes that the corporations are often portrayed as greedy, heartless entities that place profit above all else. Many people see multinational corporations as the embodiments of the evils of globalization, whereas some would accuse the corporations of being the cause of the world's problems. Corporations have been a cause of a great deal of wrongdoing in the pursuit of the profit, but they have also helped to raise the standard of living throughout much of the world, thanks to globalization. The question surrounding corporations should be how to minimize the harm they do and maximize the benefits they provide. Making money is the primary purpose of the corporations, which occasionally encourage them to act badly. Corporate incentive can be received with the aim of making globalization work. International corporations are not beholden to any local community, so their moral responsibility is weakened. Money spent or bills on lobbying in developing countries often goes a lot further towards the reasons of loss the benefits of globalization. Stiglitz note that how making the globalization work. Globalization depends on multinational corporations to unite markets, technology, and capital around the world. Reform could make the presence of the corporations on the world stage a process for good. Steps to achieve the change including developing a sense of corporate social responsibility, limiting the power of the corporations, improving corporate governance, global laws for a global economy, and reducing the scope of the corruptions. The lesson here, as in much of the rest of the book, is simple. Incentive matter and governments and international community must work harder to ensure that the incentivizing corporations are better aligned with those they touch, especially the less powerful in the developing world.
Next subject which review in this book is the burden of debt. Stiglitz believes that the large debt are burden for developing countries. The problem is easy to state. Developing countries borrow too much that force them to bear most of risk of subsequent increase in interest rate, fluctuation in exchange rate, or decrease in income. Even countries that have borrow modesty and pursue good economic policy can find themselves in difficult position, particularly during unforeseen crisis. There were happen in Argentina, Moldova, and also in Indonesia before. For the indebted countries, they are facing two unpleasant choices. One is defaulting, which is bring of economic collapse, or simply accepting assistance, which bring also to a loss of economic sovereignty. When country cannot pay what they owe, there are three alternative solutions mentioning in this book. Number one is debt forgiveness, second is debt restructuring, and third is default. Globalization can provide a model to improve how debt is used throughout the world. There are 5 key reforms are required for debt restructuring. Number one is do no harm, return to counter-cycle lending, risk reduction, conservative borrowing, and bankruptcy law. Next is reforming the global reserve system. Stiglitz says the global financial system is in need of reform. One issue is the lack of funds available to promote development. Many reserves are held in US dollar, reason because the United States is a world dominant economy and has a historical stable currency. The problem of the global financial system are systematic and have much to do with the global reserve system. New simple solution offered by Keynes is by having a global greenback proposal. The international community can provide a new form of fiat money to act as a reserve. Stiglitz believes that the global reserve currency would eliminate the problem of any country becoming too indebted and would help stabilize the trade deficit around the world. In a new global reserve system, the money generated by a new global reserve currency would allow globalization to work so much better by providing financing to projects and goods that benefit the world. Any remaining fund could be given to the world's poorest country in the model proposed by Stiglitz. Such a system could enhance global stability and global equality while delivering real change in the world.
Hi and welcome, my name is Romfita Harini. I'm a part of Group D. I'm a student of MBA program at ITNI International Business School. Today, I would like to share to all of you another discuss about chapter 10 of Making Globalization Work book by Joseph A. Stiglitz. This book talks about his concern about developing the world. Joseph said about his critically in his mind about growth, globalization, and many things about impact of globalization. This book describes about globalization good for everybody, but in a bad perspective, globalization movement is generated by sense for all workers like manufacturing industry. Globalization is unfair to developed country. Why? Because some problem of global governments highlighted by problems at work, like problems aggravated by smooth stock structure, like trade ministers meet with other trade ministers to decide on trade issues with little attention to environmental and health consequences, markedly different from way decisions are made within countries. Globalization, as it has been managed, has undermined democracy depend on reducing the scope for democracy decision making. Also, economic globalization has outpaced politically globalization. Like democracies have learned how to temper the market economy to make sure that the most individual benefit. But this good thing that we have not yet learned about how to temper the excesses of globalization. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to subscribe, like, comment, and support Group Day. And hope you like it. Hope you enjoy, and bye bye.